She stands before the icons, 15 years old, the dress heavy, foreign, the crown like a ring around her throat, the scarlet blush, not from shame, from cold, or fear, or simply because everything around is too loud. The ceremony is brief. The priest barely looks at her face. He speaks with her father, then with the groom, Ivan, the Tsar's younger brother, a man with soldier's hands and a voice that breaks the silence. He is almost twice her age. They say he is honest, faithful, and terribly boring. She did not know him before this day, saw him once from afar at some reception. Then he did not notice her. Now he will call her wife. The feast, modest, wintry. Mead, roasted geese, music that makes her want to cover her ears. Guests smile, drink, throw wishes at her. Be fruitful, pray, serve your husband. She nods, remains silent, smiles, but inside, emptiness, and a quiet, barely noticeable heat, not passion, a burn. Because since childhood she knew they would choose her for her face, for her blood, for her figure, not for what was in her head, not for her voice. She tried to resist when her father announced the betrothal. Once, tears, curses, threats, then submission, quiet, poisonous. She knew her role to be invisible, beautiful but quiet, faithful even if you don't love. She would live in the harem, bear 3 children, obey her husband, not look strangers in the eye. But no one said she couldn't think, and she thought a lot. At night, lying under thick blankets when her husband snored beside her, she did not sleep. She imagined herself as a bird, or a shadow, or fire, something impossible to catch. In her youth, she secretly read books, learned that women could be not only mothers and wives, that there was something else, feeling, choice, will. But here in this house, no one spoke of this. The first months she was perfect, quiet, compliant, obedient. She knew how to look so as not to offend, how to smile so that no one would understand, but still there were those who sensed it. One guardsman dropped his cup, meeting her gaze. One scribe blushed when she said, "Thank you." Once even her husband's brother held his hand too long on her wrist. She knew how to be silent, but her eyes spoke. She knew how to wait, but inside pulsed thirst. She was not evil, was not even bold, simply did not want to be marble. When her husband left for the first time for 3 weeks to Nizhny, she remained in the house alone, and suddenly understood how silence sounds, not like fear, like freedom. She opened the chest where her mother's letters lay, read until dawn, then put on the red dress they had forbidden, then went out to the garden, alone, without escort. And someone among the servants said, "She has changed." No, she had not changed. She remembered who she was. That same little girl who, even before the wedding, sat at the mirror, drew a bird on the glass with a wet finger, and whispered, "You are mine, I am yours." But no one heard this. Chapter 2. Silver in her hair and sin in her smile. She sat by the window, did not embroider, did not read, simply sat, her hair loose. Light fell on it as if it were not fair, but graying, as if fate had marked her before her time. But silver suited her, It made her dangerous, a woman you don't look at, but observe. The servants knew. When she was silent, it meant she was thinking. When she smiled, it meant she had already decided. There was no harshness in her gestures, but everyone understood. To disobey meant to disappear, not in prison, in consciousness, in trust, in her eyes. Each time her husband prepared for a journey, she stood at the gates, saw him off. Her gaze warm, her face quiet. He bowed, kissed her hand, got into the sleigh. And each time departing, he thought, "What a good wife I have." He would leave, and the palace would come alive. On the first day, she arranged silence. On the second, received guests, unofficially. On the third, ordered music. On the fourth, wrote letters. And on the fifth, the game began. Into her chambers entered those who knew the rules, not to ask unnecessary questions, not to expect attachment, not to stay until morning. But many forgot, because in her smile was sin, not lust, more dangerous, power. She did not fall in love. She controlled. Guardsmen came at her call, one for wine, another for a book, a third for the night. Scribes brought papers and stayed. She dictated to them not orders, words that made faces redden. One of them, quite young, begged to stay. The next day was sent to Siberia. Ambassadors came without invitation, some for politics, but then for her. She did not refuse, but did not promise. For her, each one was a figure on the board. Her game was not about feelings. Feelings interfere, but power excites. When a man who has just signed a decree falls to his knees, this is not passion, this is proof. She was not interested in the body. She was interested in choice. What today? A soldier or a poet, or a foreigner with hands smelling of spices? Each a new chord, a new scene. She called her evenings theater. The curtain rises, she would say, pouring wine. Sometimes for one, sometimes for two. And each time in the room was not carnal, theatrical. They knew this was not about love. This was about her. Once one of the guests tried to speak of feelings. She silently approached, kissed, and said, "You are beautiful, but not the main character." In such moments, she resembled a she-wolf, solitary, strong, confident, not crying, not growling, simply the mistress of her pack, who could drive out anyone or keep them if she wanted. Women at court hated her, men feared her, but all wanted her. Because in her was what was forbidden, the right to her own game. And every move was calculated, every touch like a seal, every night like... Chapter 3. The cook knows, the guard knows, only he doesn't know. In the kitchen, the stove blazes from dawn. There they don't discuss politics, don't quote the gospel, but they know everything that happens in the house, especially at night. Rumors are born between the noise of pots and the crackling of coal. Cook Varvara, no longer young, with hands burned from ovens, cuts onions and whispers, "The mistress's candles don't go out until dawn, and a candle doesn't burn without need." The apprentice nods, adding to the dough, and adds, "Yes, she eats grapes from the palm, not from her own, a man's." They don't laugh. This isn't funny. This is knowledge. and knowledge in the boyar's house is more dangerous than a dagger. The guard is also not deaf. The sentry at the back entrance saw a shadow flicker at night. First thought, a cat. Then heard a voice, male. First loud, then muffled. Change of post and no report. Because if the wrong ears hear the name, not only the head will fall. Servants notice details. A new ribbon in the mistress's hair, too expensive, not from the treasury. A mark from a ring on her neck, as if from someone else's necklace. The scent of incense, overcome by something else, masculine. They are silent, but they know. They know that not every guest is served wine in silver, that some leave letters accidentally forgotten in coat pockets, that some return and then disappear. But there is one who doesn't know, or pretends. Ivan, the husband. He comes rarely, busy with the treasury, census, watching his brothers. He believes his wife is pure, that she prays every evening, that she waits. He brings her gifts, scrolls, jewelry. She kisses his hand, looks straight into his eyes and says, "I missed you." And in this moment, the servants turn away. Because they are not actors, and seeing such a performance makes them uncomfortable. The city also knows. Those who deliver food hear. Those who change bed linens guess. Those who sew dresses see. Measurements taken not only for holidays. Even the cobbler once said, "They come to her in new boots and leave, without souls." But in the city they whisper not only from envy, but from anxiety. Because such a woman doesn't simply sin. She makes choices. And in her position, choice is dangerous. Varvara, the old cook, once said to a young servant, "Such things are not forgiven, not by God, not by husband, not by time." And then added, "But also not forgotten." And he still writes to her from the road, "Pray for me," and believes she prays. And she indeed whispers something in the night, but her words are not prayers, but names of those who were and those who will be. Chapter 4. The House Where Men Disappear. Her house was quiet, too quiet. Not from the absence of sounds, from their muffling. Fabrics on the walls muffled footsteps, curtains, glances. And the walls themselves, it seemed, absorbed the voices of those who entered there, but didn't always leave. First was a boyar, a guest from Tver, arrived with a caravan of furs and a proposal of alliance. In the evening he dined in her chambers. Servants said, the laughter was loud, the goblets empty. In the morning, he vanished. His horse remained in the stable, his hat in the entrance hall, but he himself, nowhere. Official version, left early. Unofficial, he never appeared anywhere again. Then a hussar, young, handsome, with a voice like the ring of a sword. At the ball he looked only at her, she only at him. A dance, a glass, a kiss by the column, and after, silence. Servants say he entered her chambers and did not come out. 2 days later his name was crossed out from the regiment list, as if he had not lived, as if he had never been. Later, an artist. He was called to paint her portrait. He stayed for 3 days. Then, sudden illness, died. Managed to finish only the eyes. The canvas is still kept in the basement. No one dares to burn it. They say it watches. Rumors multiplied. One servant left himself. Said he didn't want to see what happens behind the curtains. Another was silent until he got drunk in a tavern. There he revealed, "She's not a woman. She is an abyss. You look and disappear." They whisper that in her bedroom was a secret passage, that under the floor a second exit, that she has a list, whom to call, whom not to call, whom to erase. But no one proved anything, because they didn't dare, because they were afraid. And yet men continued to go, like moths to light. Each thought, "I am different." Each believed, "It won't happen to me." One said, "If I disappear, let it at least be from her kiss." He vanished 2 days later. She hid nothing, looked straight into eyes, laughed easily. The dress slipped from her shoulders like an accident. The scent of leather and incense pursued guests for another week. And no one knew whom she would kiss tomorrow. Who would be next? Who would disappear? Chapter 5. The List Carved in Wood. The garden behind her chambers was neither large nor particularly well tended. Lush flower beds, fashionable alleys and fountains, all this remained in the outer courtyard, where guests strolled and her husband walked when he was in the city. But here, behind the inner wall, silence began, not abandonment. Seclusion. Pines, maple, some moss, a couple of benches by the wall, a place no one called a garden. And yet 2 paths led there, one through the greenhouse, the other through the side door of her bedroom. At the very far edge stood a bench, old, of black oak, stable like memory. None of the servants approached it, sat near it, wiped the dust, not because it was forbidden, because they understood. If you looked closely, on the back of the bench, scratches. Someone would say traces of time, cracks, accidental notches. But one who knew understood. These were names, neat, restrained, almost invisible. And only in the slanted light of sunset did letters appear on the smooth wood, one name under another. The handwriting was the same, feminine, firm. The names began simply. The first, a guardsman, a short name, almost childish. Perhaps he was the first, or the most harmless. Then, a name known even at court, the junior scribe. Further, a man without title, just a name, perhaps from the street. Then, an official. Then, a foreigner. And so on, each name like a memory, not of passion, of presence. Whom she let in, whom she kept. The bench was not a confessional, it was a register. No pity, no rapture, only order. But there was one name, below all the others, slightly larger, and crossed out. The line was rough, deep, as if not carved with a knife, but gouged with nails. Those who saw her did not speak of this aloud. Servants were silent, but among themselves they knew. The name, not masculine, not from the people, a name from the clan, from those who sit next to the tsar. They said, "Brother, the younger one, not the one she was married to, another. The one who appeared at court without warning. The one who gave a ring that was not worn in public. The one who vanished from the horizon suddenly, without leave, without war, without letter." After him, she didn't leave her chambers for a week. Then came out in black, without mourning, without veil, simply a black dress, and behind her, silence. Even the walls didn't creak. A servant once saw her sitting by this bench herself, alone, with a knife in her hand. He thought, "She wants to cut away the name." but she only ran her finger along the letters, slowly, and left it. Now the bench stood in the same place. No one approached it, but everyone knew it was there. Some guests tried to ask about it. She looked into their eyes and didn't answer. Some tried to joke. They were no longer invited. Servants passed among themselves. If your name is not on the bench, you were not with her. If on the bench, forget you were. But no one knew what was more frightening. She kept no diaries, wrote no letters, left no records. Her entire archive, wood, living, silent, dark. And in it, everything you need to know about those who were and about the one she did not forgive. Chapter 6. The Night When Everything Came Out. It was an ordinary night. No thunder, no storms, no eclipses. Only damp air and a veil over the garden. The windows in her chambers were slightly open. The wind weakly stirred the curtains. Everything looked as it always did. But something had changed. He left first. Not having time to dress completely, her scent still remained on his neck, on his lips, a trace of her wine. On his wrist, a scratch. Light, intentional. He was hurrying, and didn't notice how a sheet slipped from his sleeve, folded warm from his body with a spot of wax on the edge. A letter. Not a love letter, not a confession, more dangerous. In it, not names but hints, places, time, words that prove nothing but are said enough. A letter that should not have been written, should not have been delivered, should not have been found. But it was found by the wrong person, found by a servant, quiet, unnoticeable, one of the new ones, a couple of months ago appeared in the kitchen and stayed. Turned out not simple. A spy, not in the sense of intrigues, directly, sent by order, to watch, to listen, to wait. The letter was passed into reliable hands, through the monastery brother, then to the capital, and soon onto the desk of a man whose face the whole country knew, the tsar. But such letters are not given to the tsar immediately. First, to the brothers, and one of them, reading aloud, slowly raised his head. He knew the handwriting. Knew it too well. The name was not written, but it was read between the lines. He himself was among those whom she knew closer than all, who swore to her, who was near, even when it was forbidden. He betrayed her, not from hatred, from fear. Because the letter meant one thing. She had gotten out of control. She knew too much and was writing, which meant no longer a woman, already a threat. That night they began to act, without thunder, without horsemen, without seals. Servants began to disappear. One was sent away for household needs, another for training. The palace emptied without having time to be frightened. The servant who found the letter disappeared forever. Someone said he was rewarded, someone that he himself disappeared under the ice. But everyone understood. He had become a lever, and the lever worked. No one warned her. In the morning, she woke up and noticed that the corridor was unusually quiet. Those who should have brought tea didn't come. Those who usually set water for washing forgot. She felt something had happened. Opened the window, and no one in the garden. Even the birds had flown away. In the evening, her husband's brother came to her, without servants, without shouting. He looked into her eyes, long, silently, put the letter on the table, and said, "You can no longer be silent. Now everyone knows," and left. Didn't turn around. She remained in the room alone. On the table, the letter, her words, her handwriting, her tone. They were beautiful. They were bold. They were free. Too free. Now the Romanovs knew. And when the Romanovs know, nothing can be returned. Chapter 7. Interrogation without torture. On her knees, but unrepentant. They didn't take her in chains, didn't drag her on a cart, didn't announce the sentence in the square. Everything was quieter, colder, from within. The carriage arrived at the monastery before dawn, gray lined with fur. Without coats of arms, without escort. Outside, fog. Inside, silence. She sat straight, fingers folded on her knees, gaze directed at the window, but seeing nothing. When the gates of Chudov Monastery opened, no one met her. Only one monk, tall, with quiet steps, in black. Without words, he indicated the way, not to a cell, to the lower chamber. They didn't beat her. They didn't chain her. She knew. Everything would be different, much subtler, much more frightening. In the room there was no interrogator, only two, behind a screen, and her, on her knees, before an icon. Only the crunch of ice on windows and the creak of her breathing could be heard. Name the names. The voice, soft, almost paternal. She raises her head. You want all of them? A pause. Only those who were in the house. Then let's start with you. The listening behind the screen quiets. She smiles, not mockingly, with the tired smile of a person who fears nothing anymore. She speaks calmly, without boldness, without mercy. She speaks of one who brought her fruit and then himself, of another who drew her shoulder before touching it, of the one who told her he loved her but trembled every night, of those who were rough, clumsy, shy, beautiful, sad, funny. She speaks of the smell of leather after the hunt, of letters smelling of incense, of kisses in the library, of the bench in the garden. They are silent. She speaks, doesn't defend herself, doesn't justify herself, simply tells, word by word, story by story, truth that is no longer capable of wounding. One of the listeners can't stand it, leaves. The other remains until the end. When they ask her, "Do you regret it?" she looks into the face calmly, without challenge. "And you? Do you?" A pause, long, heavy, like a sentence. "You were a wife." "No, I was a woman." And then for the first time someone calls it aloud, not a crime, but a decision. She remains in the monastery, not as a prisoner, as a ghost. They don't cut her hair. Don't force her to fast. They don't give her books, but they give her time. She no longer speaks, but also doesn't remain silent. At night she stands by the window, looks into the garden, mentally runs her fingers along the bark of that very bench. And if someone in those hours dared to ask, "Who are you now?" she would answer without a shadow of hesitation, "I am not a wife. I am a woman." Chapter 8. the place where only czarinas fell. At first they thought they would confine her to a monastery, then that they would arrange an accidental death. But the decision was different, more ancient, more humiliating, safer. To exile, there where they forget, to the north. They didn't name the place, simply far away, where winter lasts 9 months, where ice covers windows from inside, where even birds fly low as if from fear. A place where they used to exile widows of czars, a place about which they don't write in court chronicles, only whisper. A place of falling. She traveled long, through forests where roads disappeared, through villages where children hid from the unfamiliar carriage, through cities where no one recognized her face, and this was new. No one bowed, no one whispered. She was no one. The house, low-hewn, lonely, stood on a hill from which only forest was visible. An old woman, housekeeper, mute, guard, 2 archers, without insignia, without words. Inside, stove, bench, bed. Window, 1, small. Light entered it only a few hours a day. The rest, grayness and silence. She didn't ask for more and didn't expect it. Time there didn't flow, it dripped. Drip, drip, drip. Days confused with nights. Letters didn't come, voices were forgotten, but inside her, something continued to live. Sometimes at night she went out onto the snow barefoot, stood among the pines and looked at the sky. Didn't pray. Sang, quietly, prolonged. Words, old from before marriage. Songs her mother sang, or she herself as a girl. The forest froze, and only the wind answered her with howling. Women from the nearest village said, "In those forests, someone sings at night." One swore she saw a figure in white, like a shadow gliding between trees. Men crossed themselves, evil spirits, and one old woman said, "A czarina, only without a throne." Sometimes they brought her books, old, torn, without beginning and end. She read them, syllable by syllable, then wrote words in the snow, so as not to forget that she could. In spring, birds flew in. One sat on her palm. She cried for the first time, not from pain, from the fact that her body still remembered warmth. She sewed herself clothes from scraps, altered her former dress into a coverlet, not because she needed to, because to remain human. A year passed, then a second. She didn't write letters, didn't call, didn't wait, but lived, not as punished, as abandoned. And in this place, where before her sat only widows, fallen wives, nameless women, she didn't feel dead. Because if you sing, you're alive. If you remember your name, you exist. And if they fear you, even in silence, it means you still own yourself. Chapter 9. The woman they cursed and wanted. In Moscow, her name was not spoken. Not from fear, from necessity. Too much was hidden behind it. Too loud was the echo. In orders, she was not mentioned. In chronicles, bypassed. Even priests reading prayers for the repose of the royal family's souls omitted her line. She became emptiness in the genealogy, a shadow in history's mirror. But shadows don't disappear. They just become quieter. Several years passed. It seemed everything was forgotten. She was there, far away, snow, isolation, silence. But Moscow didn't forget. Couldn't. At night, in those same chambers where she once walked with a cup in her hand, silence now reigned. But servants still felt her aroma, not in things, but in the air, not perfume, memory. Men who had been near her at least once no longer found peace. They married, worked, prayed, but wrote letters, without address, without hope. On thin paper, written by a hand trembling from a feeling you couldn't name, not love, not guilt, obsession. And each letter began the same way. If you could answer. They didn't know where to send them. Some gave them to servants, those burned them behind the yard, and some kept them in chests like relics. Women also didn't remain silent. They hated her, not for seducing men, but for allowing herself not to fear. In markets they tore her portraits from counters. In tavern songs her name was replaced with words nameless, corrupted, the one who fell. But still they sang, because in every woman, if only for a moment, she responded, like a whisper. You too can say no. Young noblewomen hid rings with initials similar to hers under their pillows. Some to remember, others to be like her, third to curse. One girl, a deacon's daughter, confessed, "Sometimes I pray and think of her. I'm ashamed, but I don't stop." In bedrooms of noble houses, quarrels began. Husbands began avoiding words touching on freedom. Wives began speaking quieter, but looking more directly. She changed not only men, she changed women. And now, even those who burned her images secretly envied, because she was not a saint, but herself. Not perfect, but real. Not submissive, but alive. And in this city, where everything had a price, her freedom became the most expensive and most forbidden memory. Because a woman can be crossed out of the record, exiled, erased, cursed, but you cannot burn out desire. And she was desire. For them, for her, for an entire generation that was already whispering her name in the darkness. Chapter 10. She whose body they buried, but whose name they did not. She died in silence. Not in agony, not in bed, not in the presence of a priest, simply in silence. Just as she had lived the last years, without crying, without mercy, without forgiveness. They found the body in the morning. The old housekeeper woman, the same one who had once met her at the gates, opened the door and didn't immediately understand. The room was warm. The fire in the stove was already dying out. Nearby, a book, open to a page without text, and a hand, lightly touching the edge, as if she had simply been reading, and fell asleep. They didn't bury her at the church, and didn't return her to Moscow, too dangerous even dead. The grave under a fir tree, without a cross, without a plaque, only a broken branch in the place where the earth was fresh. The guard lowered his head. The monk read a prayer to himself. No one cried. But it didn't end there. 100 years passed. History compressed her fate into a couple of lines. The Romanovs changed. Power changed. But memory remained. One poet, living in Petersburg, wrote verses about women of the past. about widows, about czarinas, about rebels. And suddenly, in one notebook appeared, "I saw a woman. She was like fire, and in her ashes, gold." The name was not named, but everyone knew whom this was about. From this day in salons, they began to say, "This is about her." In the tavern, they added a new verse to the song. And in one private library, they again took out a letter, faded, unsent. The portrait that had once been hidden under the stairs was hung in the bedroom. They looked at it, not from lust, from respect, from envy, from fear, because she didn't ask, didn't forgive, didn't retreat. She left as she had lived, quietly, without tears, without a scene, but left behind not emptiness, ashes. And in these ashes, strangely enough, turned out to be what hadn't been visible in life: value. Because love can be forgotten, because kisses disappear, memories are erased, bodies burn, but desire remains. The desire to be oneself, the desire not to bow, the desire to choose. She was not a saint, not a czarina, not a heroine, but she became a symbol, not because she fought, but because she didn't submit. And precisely by this, she outlived all who crossed out her name. Because a name can be buried, but a woman who knew her own worth, never.